on today's episode of MR Triton, we're installing this 9,500 pound RUNVA winch on the ARB summit bar. Let's get stuck into it. So on today's episode of MR Triton, we're installing this RUNVA 9,500 pound winch to the front of the Triton. And there's a number of reasons why I've decided to go with the winch installation as my next modification, which I will elaborate further on a specific video. You will have noticed that the tray rack has been canvassed. I will also give you guys an in-depth video about that process as well. So in August, September, about a year or so ago, what we did was our ARB summit bar installation. And obviously when you install a winch, you really want to install your winch while you're installing your bull bar. Now, at the time, I didn't really think about getting a winch. I wasn't really too fussed by that. I thought my vehicle was capable enough without it. But, as I said, in a future video, I'll talk to you about why I feel now that I'm justified in needing to buy a winch. So this RUNVA winch kit came with a number of different inclusions. So we've got obviously our winch, your motor, your gearbox, and a synthetic dyneema rope. We've also got our multi-function control box. So obviously, you've got your 12-volt manual control, plug it into your box, hold onto it out your driver's side window or something like that. You can control it from within the cab. Alternatively, and preferably, you've got your wireless remote as well. So that prevents you from having to have a connection, have your window open so you don't get mud in your window. It's just a cleaner process. Further to that, if you compare these two devices, this is much more compact. Slide it in your center console. This here is more a put it behind a rear seat or in your glove box, but this is actually going to take up a lot of room in your glove box, so far less compact. I'm probably going to chuck this under my passenger seat with my jumper cables, and this will just sit there nice and handy for when I need it next. Any good winch, in fact I think most winches these days, come with an isolator switch. So obviously you can isolate your winch from your battery. You're not really going to need to use your winch while you're driving to work or while you're on the tools at work or something like that. So why would you have it drawing power from your battery? What I would use this for would be disconnected in day-to-day life. However, like the weekend that I just went on that trip recently, I knew that we were going to get into the bog in the marshlands. So chuck your isolator switch on, get that winch ready to go. That way you don't need to pop your bonnet and switch it on while you're in the muck. It's pretty hard to get to the front of your vehicle when you're waist deep in mud. And finally, we've got our nice big hook here. So a lot of people don't use like a hook as their recovery method. There are special attachments that you can use where you put a bow shackle or D-shackle through the attachment. Looks traditional, comes with it. I'm not really gonna argue with that. So enough gas bagging, let's get stuck into some installation. So with this installation, the first thing I want to start off with is dismantling a bit of this bull bar sort of thing. We've got our little wings on either side, so we're going to remove those. We've also got to adjust where the number plate sits. I haven't bought the ARB winch installation kit with the number plate flip up, whatever you want to call it. It's 135 bucks, and a conversation with the guys at ARB sort of yielded that I don't actually need one. If you have a summit bar and you've got the winch blanking plate, just simply remove the blanking plate, put on your brand of winches fair lead, which is the steel block that goes at the front of the winch that guides the cable out, and it will be good to go. But obviously there is a specific winch installation kit if you're keen on that. There's another aspect to this installation that you got to understand. The winch currently sits like this, right? You got your sort of clutch here or whatever to free spool your winch. So obviously it's engaged, the motor has locked it all in, you turn the free spool and you can pull the winch out, right? That needs to sit at the top of your winch so you can access it. At the bottom here, however, that is where your bolts connect to your bull bar, and those bolts will need to be facing forwards, not downwards. So what you need to do is you need to adjust everything. You need to disconnect the gears and rotate the mounting bracket. It's a bit of a concept. You'll see when I do the installation of this. What we're going to do, we're going to pull apart the front of the bull bar a bit, work out exactly what angle this winch needs to be on, and then we'll sort of start to reassemble the bull bar. It's always much nicer putting things on as opposed to taking them off. Get all that load of that. I'm going to take this as an opportunity to clean the wings out. It's a bit of weight in there. So we'll remove the wings. Just going to remove this little plate here. I want to try to avoid removing the bull bar altogether. I doubt I'm going to be able to do that, but we'll see how we go. Right, so the top cover has been removed from the top of the bull bar. So that's where we put our control box, whatever you want to call it, in here. There's actually a mounting bracket specifically designed to house it. Now before we actually install that, we're going to get the winch sorted out, because that's a heavy, large, cumbersome part. And then what we'll do, once we've got the cumbersome, heavy part out of the way, then we'll fiddle around with the little wiring and the smaller nuts and bolts. So in order to remove this blanking plate, we've had to remove the 6 nuts and bolts that hold the bull bar onto the brackets that connect it to the chassis. So a little bit of support and hold the weight on it. We've disconnected the indicators, we've disconnected the spotties. Easy to plug them back in, so no stress at all after that. We'll take the bull bar off. The thing is, the winch itself is 25 or 22 kilos, I think it is actually. So we're going to add a fair bit of weight for when we put the bull bar back on the vehicle. But removal of the bull bar is going to make it a lot easier. Never thought I'd see that again. Triton with no bull bar. So the bull bar's removed, indicators disconnected, spotties are disconnected. What we're going to do now is we're going to have a suss of A, removing the winch blanking plate, which is the entire reason we had to remove the bull bar, and B, how the winch is going to mount to the bull bar and how the fair lead is going to mount to the front of the bull bar. So we'll have a play around with it. So this is how it's going to sit in the bull bar. However, this is our free spool lever clutch, whatever you want to call it. We need to be able to put it onto free spool and then re-engage it. So what we need to do is, leaving the actual mounting bracket and winch as is, loosen some nuts off, some bolts off, and rotate the motor and the gears so that this is upwards. Then I can reach in front of the bull bar and disengage or re-engage the free spool. So now that we've removed the gears from the actual motor and spool, what we've done is we've loosened off or removed all of the little bolts that hold this cover plate, whatever you want to call it, from the actual gears. So what we're going to do now is we're going to work out what way it all needs to face. This side here represents the rear of the winch, and what we want is for this to be facing upwards. So really what we want is the rear to be like so. So that's the rear, and this is the top. Now what we do is we reconnect it. So generally you're meant to put a fair lead on the front of your bull bar, and the fair lead, obviously you've got a non-abrasive surface here. It's a smooth surface for your synthetic rope or your cable to slide along without being worn down and making it weak. This fair lead that came with the RUNVA and the bolts that came with it aren't long enough to go through the fair lead, through the bull bar, through the space at the bottom of the winch, and then into the nut. So I'm a little bit confused. I may work out a different fair lead perhaps to use, or some kind of a roller, but yeah, it's a bit of a confusing one, this. Control box has been installed. Didn't film it all, there was some dodginess, but it's there. Now up to the point where we connect the control box to the actual winch itself. So yellow, blue and red, you'll attach them to the relevant sections. So as you can see, the winch is connected, the wiring is all connected. I just need to work out the negative cable where that goes from the winch to the battery. Now, again, as with the spotlights, we need to take off this top cover, and from there, what we'll do is we'll run the cables up behind the grill through there on the side, straight to the battery. We need to work out where to put the isolator, but the main task at hand right now is to pre-connect the wiring, reinstall the bull bar, connect it up to the battery and make sure it all works. So after a rather undignified struggle, the bull bar is sitting on the first set of nuts and bolts. So 2 more to go on either side, then we'll connect the power. So we've reattached the bull bar, the winch is connected, I've reconnected the indicators and the spotlights. So all there is to do now is connect the winch controller to the battery, the positive and negative. Work out where we're going to set the isolator. I think it's just kind of going to sit in a little nook for now until I work out a good spot to put it. We'll cable tie up some cables and I'll put the wings and bash plate back on. Before we test out the winch itself, we're going to hitch up the hook. Goes like this, connects on, and we have this little pin that goes in between the hook itself and the connection. Alright, so what we're going to do now is we're going to show you the winch in action. I'm currently at a random car park with a random muddy puddle, and I'm going to winch off a random tree, and hopefully I don't get kicked out or they don't call the cops on me. Before we go into off-road territory where we might need the winch, I'm going to plug in the isolator switch it on so we've got power to the winch, and that way we don't have to get under the bonnet when we actually get stuck. So another strategy that I recommend is a lot of people generally hang their winch strap on one of the front recovery / tight end points. Now, it's worth noting that that isn't a rated recovery point, as you all know. Because I don't have a winch fair lead currently, which is the steel block that would otherwise be sitting here, I can't reel the winch in all the way. That's because the bolts that came with the RUNVA winch weren't long enough to penetrate through the fair lead, through the actual bull bar mounting point, and then into the actual winch body and bite into the teeth of the nut. So I'll get a fair lead later on. So for future reference, or if you are ever actually going off-road, you want to engage a free spool. So, free spool was engaged. I'm going to pull out some slack from the winch. So now we've got our winch cable. And the winch is wrapped around the bull bar, ready to go for easy use. So let's just say, for argument's sake, the vehicle is stuck in a bog hole, and how convenient, there's a nice strong gum tree right in front. So here we have our nice happy healthy tree, and we want to keep it that way, and we're going to do so by using a bridle strap or a tree trunk protector. There's different types. The idea here is that you don't just want to wrap a winch cable, whether it's a steel cable or a synthetic cable, around the tree and ring bark it and damage or even kill the tree. We enjoy going outdoors because it is beautiful and natural outdoors, and we don't want to leave damage everywhere we go. We give it full drivers, the community, a bad rap when we damage the environment. So we've got the protector wrapped around the tree roughly. What we want to do now is we're going to engage free spool and spool out the winch. generally speaking, when you connect your snatch strap to your bridle strap, you're going to use a D-shackle or a bow shackle, whatever you want to call it. The thing with winching is because there's such high poundage and high tension or stress going through your recovery gear, the less metal and of this stuff you've got lying around that can fly back and cause damage to somebody or injury to someone, the better. Because I have a hook at the end of the winch, this is all the metal I want. Luckily in this situation, I can hold on to both ends of my tree trunk protector or bridle strap, and I don't need to have additional pieces of metal that can potentially go flying and damage someone. From here, what we do is we re-engage the gears so that it's no longer in free spool. We bring up some of the tension on either our wireless remote or our hardwired remote, and we're going to winch ourselves out of this off-road obstacle. Another important rule is to use a winch blanket, dampener, a bag, something to wrap around our winch cable, so that way if it does snap, it doesn't go flying. Now the beauty about a synthetic cable is if it does break, it doesn't tend to go flying at such a rate as steel cable does. That's not to detract from the potential dangers that a winch recovery poses, but in this case I don't have a blanket, so I'm not going to use one. It's also important to note we want to gently take up the slack and see how everything works and shifts before we just go full bore, reeling yourself in just with the winch. Take up the slack, see how things go, then start pulling. We're recovered, safe and sound. It's important to check that you haven't damaged the tree too much. It's important to check your vehicle, but another more important thing is to make sure that when you return your winch to the spool, you're spooling it back up correctly. You don't want it to bunch up on one end. You also don't want it to spool up with too much slack, because again, it's going to bunch up and your synthetic rope isn't going to age as well as if it would if you were to spool it up properly with a little bit of tension. Let's remove our tree trunk protector from the tree, pack up our bridle strap, and we'll have a look at how to spool up the winch properly. But as always, we want the vehicle running every time we're spooling in the winch. That way your battery doesn't go flat, because we're running the winch off the crank battery. You always want to run your winch off a crank battery as opposed to a deep cycle, because winches like bursts of power as opposed to trickles of power. And there you have it, guys, another successful installation. As always, if you've enjoyed this video, make sure you like, share, leave a subscription, and we'll see you in the next one.